1. The brain that never truly sleeps. Imagine a city at midnight. The streets are mostly empty, storefronts are dark, the noise of the day has faded into silence. From the outside, it might seem as though the entire city has shut down. But beneath the quiet surface, something is still happening. Trains continue moving through underground tunnels, electricity flows through hidden cables, security systems remain active, maintenance crews quietly repair what needs repairing. Somewhere, a hospital is still awake. Somewhere else, a single apartment window remains illuminated. Your brain is surprisingly similar. Every night when you close your eyes and settle into bed, it may feel as though you've switched yourself off. Your body becomes still. Your awareness of the room begins to fade. The thoughts that seemed so important a few minutes ago slowly lose their grip. But your brain does not simply turn off. Instead, it changes. Different patterns of activity begin to dominate. Some areas become quieter, while others continue working behind the scenes. Your brain helps regulate breathing, body temperature, heart activity, and other essential processes. It processes memories, responds to certain sounds, and moves through several distinct stages of sleep. And then there are dreams. Entire landscapes can appear inside your mind. You can walk through places that don't exist, meet people you haven't seen in years, become someone completely different, or experience minutes that somehow feel like hours. All of this can happen while your physical body remains almost perfectly still. That is what makes sleep so strange. We tend to think of sleep as the absence of activity, a pause, a blank space between one day and the next. But perhaps it is better understood as a change of mode. Like a computer entering a different operating state, your brain reorganizes its priorities. The outside world becomes less important, while internal processes become more prominent. The conscious version of you, the part reading these words right now, gradually steps back. And something deeper takes over. Take a moment to reflect on that. Tonight, when you fall asleep, you won't be consciously supervising most of what happens inside your own head. You won't be telling your neurons what to do. You won't be deciding which memories to preserve or which bodily systems to adjust. Yet the work continues. Quietly, automatically, almost invisibly. And perhaps the strangest part is that tomorrow morning, you'll wake up and simply assume that nothing happened. But something did. Your brain spent the night maintaining, reorganizing, predicting, remembering, forgetting, and sometimes creating entire worlds. And before we explore those mysterious worlds, we have to begin with something even more fundamental. Because while you sleep, your brain may be doing something remarkably ordinary and yet profoundly important. It may be cleaning up after another day of being alive. 2. Your brain takes out the trash. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that, while you slept, someone quietly entered your home and cleaned every room. The floors have been swept, the dust has disappeared, the clutter has been sorted, things you didn't even realize were out of place have somehow been put back where they belong. You never heard a thing. You never saw anyone moving through the rooms. And yet, while you were asleep, maintenance was happening all around you. Something surprisingly similar may happen inside your brain. During the day, your brain is extraordinarily busy. Every thought, movement, sensation, memory, and decision requires biological activity. Neurons communicate with one another. Cells use energy. Chemical reactions take place constantly. And like almost any active system, this activity produces waste. Your brain, therefore, needs ways to manage the leftovers of its own activity. Sleep appears to be an important part of that process. One system researchers have become particularly interested in is known as the glymphatic system. In simple terms, it involves the movement of fluid through brain tissue and appears to help transport certain waste products away. The process is more complicated than imagining a tiny janitor walking around with a mop. The brain has no miniature cleaning crew. Instead, changes in fluid movement and the spaces surrounding brain cells appear to help with the exchange and clearance of substances. And sleep seems to create conditions that support this process. Scientists are still working out exactly how important every part of this system is, and there is much we don't yet understand. But the broader idea is fascinating. Sleep isn't merely a time when the brain stops doing things. It may be a time when the brain changes what kind of work it does. During waking hours, the priority is often responding to the world, seeing, hearing, thinking, moving, talking, deciding. During sleep, some of those demands fade into the background. The brain can redirect its resources toward maintenance and internal organization. Take a moment to imagine that happening tonight. As you lie still in the darkness, you may have no awareness whatsoever of these microscopic processes. You won't feel fluid moving through brain tissue. You won't hear the biological machinery. You won't notice individual cells doing their work. You'll simply be asleep. And perhaps that is one of the most beautiful things about sleep. Some of the most important work your brain performs happens precisely when you aren't paying attention to it. But cleaning isn't the only nighttime task. Because once the day's biological clutter is being dealt with, your brain also has another problem to solve. What should it keep? Every day gives you an enormous number of experiences, yet only a tiny fraction become lasting memories. So while the brain quietly maintains itself, it also begins sorting through yesterday. And that brings us to the next mystery: how your sleeping brain decides what is worth remembering. 3. Your brain decides what to remember. Imagine that tonight, before you fall asleep, someone hands you a box and says, "Put everything that happened today inside." You begin. The conversation you had this morning, the face of a stranger on the street, the taste of your breakfast, a song you heard in a shop, the moment you laughed, the moment you felt embarrassed, the exact position of every chair you passed. Soon, the box would be overflowing. And that's the problem your brain faces every single day. You experience far more information than you could possibly remember. If your brain tried to preserve every detail with equal importance, your memories might become an enormous, tangled archive. Useful information would be buried beneath millions of insignificant details. So somehow, the brain has to decide what matters. Sleep appears to be an important part of that process. One of the major ideas in sleep science is memory consolidation. In simple terms, consolidation is the process through which newly acquired information becomes more stable and integrated into longer-term memory. Think of your daytime experiences as rough notes written quickly in a notebook. Some are incomplete. Some are messy. Some seem important. Others seemed important for 5 minutes and then became completely irrelevant. During sleep, the brain can reorganize some of this information. Neural patterns associated with recent experiences may be replayed or strengthened, while other information becomes less accessible. Researchers have found evidence that sleep can support different kinds of memory, including factual knowledge, skills, and emotionally significant experiences. Different stages of sleep may contribute in different ways. But here's where things become particularly strange. Your brain doesn't necessarily preserve memories simply because they happened. Emotion, relevance, repetition, and connections to existing knowledge can all influence what survives. Consider learning someone's name. If you meet them once in an elevator, their name might disappear by morning. But if they become an important part of your life, that same name may become deeply embedded in your memory. The sleeping brain seems to participate in this gradual sorting process. And perhaps forgetting is part of the design too. Imagine remembering every license plate you've ever seen. Every advertisement, every passing face, every sentence you've overheard. It might sound like a superpower, but it could become a burden. Forgetting allows the brain to make room for patterns and meaning. So sleep may not simply be a filing cabinet where memories are stored. It may be closer to an editor's room. Some experiences are highlighted. Some are reorganized. Some fade into the background. And some disappear almost completely. Take a quiet moment to consider your own day. How much of it do you think you'll remember a year from now? Probably very little. Yet while you're sleeping tonight, your brain will quietly work with fragments of what happened today, helping shape what remains. And here's the truly mysterious part. Memories aren't always preserved exactly as they occurred. Sometimes the brain doesn't merely decide which memories survive. It changes them. And that means the story you remember tomorrow may not be exactly the story you lived today. In the next segment, we'll explore how sleep can become part of that mysterious rewriting process. For sleep can rewrite your memories. Imagine finding an old photograph from 10 years ago. You recognize the people, you recognize the place, you may even remember the weather that day. But now imagine that the photograph isn't actually a photograph. It's a memory. And unlike a photograph, a memory can change every time you look at it. We often imagine our memories as recordings stored somewhere inside the brain. Something happens, the brain saves it, and years later we simply press play. But neuroscience paints a stranger picture. Memory is not a perfect recording. It is something the brain reconstructs. When you remember an event, your brain doesn't necessarily retrieve a complete, untouched file. Instead, different pieces of information are brought together: sensations, emotions, facts, expectations, and previous memories to recreate an experience. And sleep may influence how that reconstruction develops. During sleep, newly formed memories can be consolidated and integrated with older knowledge. Experiences from the day may become connected to information that was already stored in the brain. Think of it like adding a new chapter to a very old book. The new chapter doesn't simply sit at the end. It may change how you understand earlier chapters. Suppose you spend the afternoon learning something difficult. At first, the information feels disconnected and confusing. After sleeping, the material may suddenly seem more organized. The facts haven't necessarily been stored exactly as they appeared yesterday. They've become part of a larger network. This is one reason sleep can be so important for learning. But the same flexibility that helps memories become useful can also make them imperfect. Your brain isn't primarily trying to preserve history with scientific precision. It's trying to build a useful model of the world. And useful isn't always the same as accurate. Consider an old childhood memory. Perhaps you remember standing in a particular room, hearing a particular sound, while a certain person was nearby. Years later, you might discover that some details were different from what you remembered. The strange thing is that the memory can still feel completely authentic. There may be no sensation of uncertainty. Your brain presents the reconstructed version with the same quiet confidence it gives to many other memories. Sleep is not necessarily rewriting memories like an editor deliberately changing sentences. Rather, the processes involved in consolidation and memory reorganization can influence how memories are represented and connected over time. Take a moment to reflect on this. Your sense of your own past is partly built from memories. And those memories are not frozen objects. They are living patterns inside a changing brain. Every time you remember something, you may be bringing the past into the present and rebuilding it once again. So when you wake tomorrow, you may carry memories from today, but they may not be exactly the memories you went to sleep with. And if sleep can subtly change what you remember, perhaps it can also change something even more personal, how you feel about what happened. Because sometimes, after a difficult day, the problem remains exactly where you left it. But somehow, after sleeping, it doesn't hurt quite as much. And that's where our next strange function of the sleeping brain begins. 5. Your brain processes emotions while you sleep. Imagine going to bed after a difficult day. Perhaps someone said something that stayed with you. Maybe an argument keeps replaying in your mind. Maybe you made a mistake and can't stop thinking about it. You lie beneath the blankets, staring into the darkness, wishing your mind would simply let the day go. But it doesn't. At least, not immediately. Then morning arrives. The problem is still there. The conversation happened. The mistake still happened. Nothing outside your bedroom has magically changed. And yet, somehow, the feeling can be different. A little quieter. A little further away. As though the emotional volume has been turned down while you slept. This is one of the fascinating relationships between sleep and emotion. Your sleeping brain isn't simply preserving memories of what happened during the day. It also appears to participate in processing emotionally significant experiences. Researchers have paid particular attention to REM sleep, the stage in which vivid dreaming commonly occurs and brain activity can resemble certain aspects of wakefulness. Exactly how REM sleep contributes to emotional regulation remains an active area of research, but sleep as a whole appears to influence how emotional memories are consolidated and how we respond to them later. Think of an emotional memory as a photograph covered in bright colors. When something upsetting happens, the emotional response can be intense. The memory and the feeling may seem fused together. Over time, and potentially through sleep, the brain can alter the relationship between the memory and its emotional intensity. The event remains part of your history, but the feeling attached to it may gradually change. This helps explain why a painful memory from years ago can sometimes feel strangely distant. You remember exactly what happened, but you no longer experience the same emotional storm that surrounded it. Of course, sleep isn't a magical cure for distress. A single night won't necessarily resolve grief, anxiety, trauma, or a difficult personal situation. But the broader principle is remarkable. The brain can continue working on emotional experiences when conscious attention has disappeared. Take a moment to reflect on your own memories. Think of something that once felt enormous, but now feels small. The event didn't vanish. You changed. Your brain changed. And perhaps somewhere along the way, sleep was part of that transformation. There is another strange consequence of this emotional processing. Dreams can become incredibly vivid when emotions are involved. A person you haven't thought about for years can suddenly appear. An old fear can return. A forgotten place can become the setting for an entirely new story. The sleeping brain seems capable of taking fragments of emotional life and weaving them into experiences that feel immediate and real. And that leads us deeper into the mystery. Because if the sleeping brain can process your emotions by replaying and rearranging pieces of your past, what happens when it begins creating something that never happened at all? What happens when your brain stops remembering the world and starts inventing one? That is where we enter the strange landscape of dreams. 6. Your brain invents entire worlds. Imagine walking through a city you've never visited. You turn a corner and find a quiet street lined with old buildings. You recognize the architecture. You know where the road leads. Perhaps there's even a small cafe at the end of the street, and somehow you know that you've been there before. Except you haven't. Because you're dreaming. This is one of the strangest abilities of the sleeping brain. It can construct an entire world without requiring the physical world to be there. When you're awake, your experience of reality is constantly fed by information from your senses. Light enters your eyes, sound reaches your ears, your skin detects temperature and pressure, your balance system tells you how you're moving through space. The brain takes all of these signals and builds an experience of being somewhere. But during a dream, much of that external information is dramatically reduced. And somehow, the experience continues. Your brain can generate landscapes, faces, voices, movement, colors, textures, and emotions from within. Think of it like a theater with no audience and no physical stage. The curtains open. There are no buildings behind them. No real ocean. No actual train station. And yet, somehow, the theater presents all of them. Dreams can combine fragments of memory with imagination and emotion. A childhood bedroom might appear with the windows from your current home. A person you haven't seen in years might suddenly be standing beside someone you met yesterday. The brain doesn't necessarily need to invent everything from nothing. Instead, it can take pieces of information it already contains and rearrange them into something new. This may explain why dreams can feel strangely familiar and completely unfamiliar at the same time. You might recognize a place that has never existed. You might know a person you've never met. You might feel that you have a history in a world that was created only moments earlier. And while you're inside the dream, the experience can feel remarkably real. Take a moment to think about that. When you dream of standing beside an ocean, you may experience the ocean as though you're actually there. Your brain can generate the sensation of space without a physical space. It can generate movement without your body moving. It can generate conversations without anyone speaking. It can generate an entire reality without the external reality being present. This doesn't mean dreams are literally another universe, of course. They are experiences generated by a sleeping brain. But they reveal something profound about consciousness. Much of what you experience as reality is not simply the world itself. It is your brain's interpretation of the world. Dreaming removes many of the usual external constraints and lets us glimpse just how powerful that internal construction can be. And once the brain has created its strange little world, there's another mystery waiting inside it. The rules of that world don't have to obey ordinary time. A dream can begin, transform, accelerate, and disappear in ways that make the passage of time feel completely unfamiliar. Sometimes, what feels like an entire journey can unfold in only a short period. So next, let's explore one of the strangest properties of the dream world: how your brain can make time itself feel different. 7. Your brain can compress hours into seconds. Imagine closing your eyes for what feels like an entire night. You dream that you're walking through an unfamiliar town, you catch a train, you miss your stop, you meet someone you've never seen before, you spend what seems like hours talking to them, then you wander through a forest as the seasons somehow change around you. Eventually, you wake up. The room is dark. You look at the clock. Only a short amount of time has passed. Where did all those hours go? Dreams have a strange relationship with time. When we're awake, time feels like one of the most reliable things in existence. A minute seems to follow another minute. Clocks move forward at a predictable pace. We organize our lives around this sequence. But our experience of time is much less stable. Think about waiting for an important phone call. 5 minutes can feel endless. Now think about 5 minutes spent laughing with someone you love. Suddenly, those same 5 minutes seem to disappear. The clock hasn't changed. Your brain has. This distinction between physical time and subjective time becomes especially interesting during sleep. Dreams can contain complicated sequences of events rapid changes in location, and sudden shifts in identity. A person might experience what seems like a long narrative, even though the corresponding dream period is relatively brief. Researchers have investigated whether dream time is dramatically different from waking time. Evidence suggests that at least some dream actions and experiences can unfold at roughly comparable rates to waking experiences, while other dream sequences can involve unusual compression, expansion, or discontinuity. So perhaps dreams don't literally allow your brain to experience an entire decade in a few seconds. Instead, something subtler may be happening. Dreams can remove many of the anchors that normally tell us how much time has passed. During waking life, clocks, sunlight, conversations, movement, and changing surroundings constantly update our sense of duration. In a dream, those signals can become inconsistent or disappear completely. Your brain is left constructing a sense of time from the experience itself. And that construction can be surprisingly flexible. Take a moment to imagine waking from a dream that seemed to last for hours. You don't have a stopwatch for the dream. You have a memory of it. And memory itself can create a strange impression of duration. A story containing many events may feel long when remembered, even if those events weren't experienced over an equally long period. This gives us a fascinating glimpse into how consciousness works. We often behave as though time is something our minds simply receive. But perhaps our experience of time is partly something the brain creates. And when the usual reference points disappear during sleep, that construction becomes visible. The clock beside your bed may continue ticking at exactly the same speed. But inside your dream, the story can jump from one moment to another without warning. A childhood home can suddenly become a modern city. Night can become morning. A conversation can last an eternity and then vanish in an instant. And the strangest part, while all of this is happening, your dreaming mind rarely stops to ask whether any of it makes sense. Because next, we are entering a world where impossible events can feel completely ordinary. 8 dreams rarely question the impossible. Imagine you're standing in the middle of your childhood home. You look out the window and see the ocean. You open the front door and discover that it leads directly into an airport. Then, without any explanation, you realize that you're late for an exam you haven't taken in 20 years. Perhaps a moment later, you're flying above the entire scene. And somehow, none of this seems strange. This is one of the quietest mysteries of dreaming. In waking life, your brain constantly evaluates whether something makes sense. If you see a car floating above a road, your attention immediately locks onto the contradiction. Something is wrong. Cars don't normally float. You might investigate. You might question what you're seeing. You might wonder whether you're hallucinating, misunderstanding the scene, or simply witnessing something extraordinary. But dreams often behave differently. You can walk through a wall, speak to someone who died years ago, suddenly become a child, or find yourself standing on another planet, and the dreaming mind may simply accept it. There is no committee meeting inside your head asking whether the situation is logically consistent. Why? One important clue involves the changing activity of different brain networks during REM sleep. Brain systems associated with emotion, imagery, and internally generated experiences can be highly active, while some regions involved in executive control and critical evaluation may operate differently than they do during ordinary waking consciousness. The result can be a fascinating imbalance. The dream is vivid. The emotions can be intense. The scenery can feel real. But the part of the mind that normally says, "Wait a minute, this makes no sense," may be less influential. Think of it like watching a movie where the editor has fallen asleep. One scene ends. Another begins. The characters change. The setting changes. The story contradicts itself. But nobody interrupts the film to explain the problem. You simply keep watching. Take a moment to reflect on how unusual that is. When you're dreaming, you can experience something completely impossible without necessarily recognizing its impossibility. And this tells us something important about how much of our waking sense of reality depends on constant evaluation. Perhaps being awake isn't merely about seeing the world. It's also about continuously checking the world. Does this make sense? Does this fit what I know? Could this really happen? During dreams, some of those questions can become quieter. Of course, dreams aren't always illogical. Sometimes people realize they're dreaming precisely because something doesn't make sense. That's one pathway into lucid dreaming. And that creates a fascinating possibility. What happens when the skeptical part of the brain suddenly wakes up inside the dream? Imagine looking around at an impossible landscape and for the first time recognizing the truth. You're not actually there. You're dreaming. The dream doesn't necessarily disappear. Instead, something remarkable happens. You become aware within it. And that strange state of consciousness leads us directly into our next mystery, the moment when you realize that the world around you isn't real, even though it feels completely real. 9. The moment you realize you're dreaming. Imagine standing in a familiar room. Everything looks normal at first. The walls are where they should be. The light coming through the window feels natural. You can hear distant sounds outside. Then you notice something. There's no ceiling. You look up. The sky is blue. And suddenly, a thought appears with unusual clarity. Wait, I'm dreaming. For a moment, everything changes. The room is still there. The sky is still above you. The people around you may still be moving. But now you know something they don't. You're inside a dream. This experience is known as lucid dreaming, and it is one of the strangest states the human brain can produce. Ordinary dreams often feel completely real while we're experiencing them. We rarely stop to question the world around us. If we're suddenly standing on the moon, we may simply accept it. But during a lucid dream, awareness can emerge within the dream itself. It's almost like the person watching the movie suddenly realizes they're sitting inside the theater while the movie continues playing. The exact neuroscience of lucid dreaming is still being investigated. Research suggests that certain brain regions and networks associated with self-awareness, metacognition, and executive functions may show patterns of activity that differ from ordinary dreaming. In simpler terms, part of the brain may regain enough reflective awareness to recognize the unusual nature of the experience. And sometimes, that awareness comes with a degree of control. People report flying, changing locations, speaking with dream characters, or deliberately exploring their surroundings. But control isn't guaranteed. A lucid dream isn't necessarily a remote control for the imagination. Sometimes you know you're dreaming, but still can't change what happens. Other times, simply becoming aware can make the dream unstable. The scene might blur. The environment may collapse. Or you may wake up. Take a moment to imagine the strangeness of that boundary. You are asleep in your bed. Your physical body is barely moving. Yet your mind has created a world. And within that world, another layer of awareness appears. You become conscious of being unconscious. You recognize that the experience isn't happening in the physical environment, even while you're experiencing it as though it is. That raises a deeper philosophical question. If consciousness can recognize itself inside a world generated by the brain, how much of our ordinary experience depends on the assumption that what we're experiencing must be external. Lucid dreaming doesn't prove that waking reality is somehow a dream. It simply demonstrates how convincing an internally generated world can become. And there's another fascinating detail. Not everyone experiences lucid dreams regularly, and the amount of control people report varies considerably. For some, lucidity may last only moments. For others, it can become a vivid and sustained experience. But even a brief moment is enough to reveal something extraordinary. The dreamer doesn't have to leave the dream to realize they're dreaming. They can discover the truth from inside it. And sometimes, the sleeping brain creates an experience so convincing that even after you wake, you may wonder whether something was actually there. A presence in the room. A shadow. A voice. Someone standing beside the bed. Which brings us to one of the most unsettling things your sleeping brain can do. It can make you feel that you are not alone. 10. Your brain can make you feel a presence. Imagine waking in the middle of the night. The room is dark but familiar. You know where you are. You can make out the shape of the furniture. Perhaps you can hear the quiet hum of a fan somewhere nearby. Then you notice something else. A feeling. Someone is here. You can't see them clearly. You may not even hear anything. Yet the sensation is strangely convincing. It feels as though another person is standing somewhere in the room, watching, waiting, or simply occupying the darkness. You look towards the doorway. Nothing. You turn toward the corner. Still nothing. And yet the feeling remains. This experience can occur around the boundaries between sleep and wakefulness, when the brain is transitioning between different states of consciousness. Some people may experience a sensed presence alongside vivid visual, auditory, or tactile hallucinations, particularly during episodes of sleep paralysis. It can be profoundly unsettling. But the mystery becomes even more interesting when we ask a simple question. How can your brain create the feeling that someone else is there when nobody is? To understand this, consider how you normally know where your own body is. You don't need to consciously calculate the position of your arms and legs. Your brain continuously combines information from touch, balance, movement, vision, and internal bodily signals to construct a model of your body and its location. At the same time, your brain is constantly predicting what should be happening around you. If you hear footsteps behind you, your brain immediately begins interpreting them. Someone might be approaching. A door might have moved. Perhaps it was just the house settling. Perception is therefore not simply about receiving information. It's also about interpreting incomplete information. During unusual sleep-wake transitions, some of these systems may temporarily become disconnected or behave differently. Your brain may have a strong sense that there is an agent nearby without having reliable sensory evidence for who or what that agent is. The experience can then become remarkably vivid. Take a moment to imagine how strange that is. You don't merely think someone is there. You feel that someone is there. There is a difference. A thought can be dismissed. A sensation can be much harder to ignore. Throughout history, experiences like this have sometimes been interpreted as ghosts, spirits, demons, or other supernatural visitors. The cultural explanation may change from place to place, but the underlying human experience can be remarkably similar. Modern sleep science offers a neurological framework for understanding at least some of these episodes. And perhaps the most fascinating lesson isn't that the brain can make us frightened. It's that the brain can construct an incredibly specific sense of another person's presence from its own internal activity. The room hasn't changed. The darkness hasn't changed. Nobody has entered. But your experience of the room has. And that leads to an even stranger possibility. If the brain can create the feeling that another person is present, what happens when it begins to weaken the feeling that you are physically present? What happens when the boundaries of your own body become blurred? That is where the next mystery begins. Because while you sleep, your brain can sometimes make your own body feel strangely distant, or almost as if it has disappeared. 11. Your body can seem to vanish. Imagine lying perfectly still in a dark room. You know you're in bed, you can hear the faint sounds around you, you know where your arms and legs should be. But then something feels different. Your body doesn't seem quite as present as it normally does. Perhaps your arms feel unusually light. Maybe your legs seem distant. For a moment, you might even have the strange impression that you're floating, sinking, expanding, or somehow separated from your physical form. It sounds impossible. After all, how could you lose the feeling of your own body without actually losing your body? But your sense of having a body is something the brain actively constructs. During waking life, you rarely have to think about this process. Your brain continuously receives information from your skin, muscles, joints, inner ear, eyes, and internal organs. It combines those signals into a constantly updated model of where your body is and what it is doing. You don't consciously calculate where your hand is. You simply know. Sleep changes this relationship. As you drift deeper into sleep, external sensory information becomes less important. Your muscles become relaxed, and during REM sleep, many skeletal muscles are actively inhibited. Visual information from the outside world is also no longer providing the same steady stream of information. At the same time, the brain is generating its own internal experiences. Dreams can therefore create movement without actual movement. You might dream that you're walking while your physical legs remain still. You might dream that you're falling while lying safely beneath the blankets. The brain can create a virtual body inside the dream. And sometimes, the boundaries between that imagined body and the physical body can become surprisingly flexible. This is part of why sleep can produce experiences such as floating, flying, spinning, or feeling detached from the body. These sensations don't necessarily mean that anything supernatural is happening. They can emerge from the brain's changing interpretation of bodily signals during unusual states of consciousness. Take a moment to notice your own body. You may feel the weight of your head against the pillow. Perhaps you can feel your hands resting somewhere nearby. But imagine how strange it would be if those sensations suddenly faded. You would still physically exist exactly as before. Nothing about your body would have vanished. Only your brain's representation of it would have changed. And that leads to a surprisingly deep idea. The feeling of being a physical person may not be a single, permanent thing. It may be an ongoing construction. Your brain continually tells you without words, this is me, this is my body, this is where I am. Most of the time, the message is so consistent that you never notice it. Sleep gives us occasional glimpses of what happens when that consistency begins to loosen. And yet, even while your conscious awareness of the body fades, your brain doesn't simply abandon its watch. It continues monitoring the world around you. A sound in the darkness. A change in breathing. A familiar voice. A sudden movement. Somewhere beneath the sleeping mind, a quiet sentinel remains awake. And that brings us to the next mystery, how your brain can sleep while still keeping watch over the world. 12. Your brain keeps watch while you sleep. Imagine falling asleep in a quiet house. The lights are off, your eyes are closed, your thoughts are beginning to dissolve into fragments, you no longer pay attention to the room around you. And yet, somewhere beneath that peaceful unconsciousness, your brain is still listening. A distant car passes outside. You don't wake. A refrigerator clicks on. You don't wake. A familiar sound comes from another room. Perhaps without fully realizing it, your brain notices. Then imagine a sudden alarm. Your eyes open almost immediately. Your heart begins beating faster. For a few seconds, you may have no idea what happened, but your brain has already decided that this sound deserves your attention. This is one of the fascinating contradictions of sleep. You can be deeply asleep without becoming completely disconnected from the world. Sleep reduces your responsiveness to many external signals, but it doesn't necessarily shut sensory processing down completely. The sleeping brain continues receiving and evaluating information, although the degree of processing depends on the sleep stage, the strength of the stimulus, and its significance to you. Think of your brain as a security guard working the night shift. Most of the building is closed. The lights are dim. The doors are locked. The guard isn't inspecting every room every second. But they're still listening. Most noises can be ignored. Some cannot. This helps explain why a loud, unfamiliar noise might wake you while a steady sound, such as a fan, becomes almost invisible to your awareness. The brain isn't simply asking, "Did I hear something?" It is also evaluating, "Does this matter?" And context can make a difference. A sound that means nothing to one person may be extremely important to another. Your brain learns which signals deserve attention. Parents, for example, can become highly responsive to certain sounds associated with their children. A familiar voice can carry different significance from an unfamiliar noise. The sleeping brain, therefore, isn't simply disconnected from the environment. It's selective. It seems to create a hierarchy of importance. Take a moment to think about the room around you tonight. There may be sounds you haven't consciously noticed for several minutes. The hum of electricity, traffic in the distance, a fan, the movement of air. Your brain may be receiving these signals even though you aren't consciously attending to them. Most are allowed to fade into the background. And that's probably essential. If every tiny sound woke you, sleep would become almost impossible. Your brain has to learn when to ignore the world. But there is something even more remarkable happening beneath all of this. While you're sleeping, your brain isn't only monitoring sounds and movement outside your body. It's also monitoring what is happening inside. Your breathing, your heart, your temperature, your chemistry. Without you consciously directing any of it, ancient systems deep within the brain continue keeping the body alive. And perhaps nothing demonstrates the hidden independence of the sleeping brain better than breathing itself. Because even when your conscious mind disappears into dreams, something inside you continues counting every breath. 13. Your brain controls breathing without asking you. Right now, you're breathing. Perhaps you weren't thinking about it until those words appeared. You inhale. You exhale. Then you do it again. And again. Most of the time, you don't have to tell yourself to breathe. You don't have to issue instructions before every inhale, and you don't need to consciously calculate when the next breath should arrive. Your brain simply does it. Now imagine falling asleep. The conscious part of your mind gradually fades, thoughts become slower, images begin appearing, your awareness of the room becomes weaker. And yet, you keep breathing. This is one of the quietest miracles happening every night. Breathing sits at the strange intersection between conscious control and automatic survival. You can deliberately change your breathing for a while. You can take a deep breath, hold it briefly, breathe faster, breathe more slowly. But eventually, automatic systems take over again. Deep inside the brain, networks in the brainstem help generate and regulate the basic rhythm of breathing. They respond to signals about the body's internal chemistry, particularly changes associated with carbon dioxide levels. As carbon dioxide rises, the body needs to increase ventilation to restore balance. You don't need to consciously notice this. You don't need to think, my carbon dioxide level is increasing. Your nervous system handles the adjustment. And this becomes especially important during sleep. When you're awake, conscious attention can influence breathing. You can decide to take slow breaths while relaxing, for example. But when you're asleep, that conscious supervisor is largely absent. The automatic machinery continues. Think of a lighthouse. The lighthouse keeper doesn't have to manually switch the beam on and off every second. The system has been designed to keep operating through the night. Your breathing is somewhat like that. The conscious mind can wander away. Dreams can begin. Awareness can disappear. And yet, somewhere beneath it all, the rhythm continues. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Take a moment to notice how strange this is. Your body contains systems that can continue protecting you even when you aren't consciously aware of them. And breathing isn't the only thing being regulated. During sleep, the brain also participates in controlling heart activity, body temperature, hormone rhythms, and many other physiological processes. The sleeping brain isn't an empty brain. It's coordinating a remarkable amount of invisible activity. There is, however, another strange contradiction. While your brain is keeping your body alive, it can also deliberately prevent much of your body from responding to the movements happening inside your dreams. You may dream that you're running through a forest. You can feel your legs moving. You can feel yourself sprinting. Perhaps you're trying to escape something behind you. But your real legs remain almost completely still. Why doesn't your body simply act out the dream? Because during one particular stage of sleep, the brain does something extraordinary. It temporarily places much of your voluntary movement system behind a lock. The dream continues. The body doesn't. And next, we'll explore why your brain deliberately keeps you from physically acting out the worlds it creates. 14. Your brain temporarily paralyzes you. Imagine that you're dreaming you're running. You're moving through a dark forest, branches passing beside you as your feet strike the ground. You can feel your legs working. Your heart seems to be racing. You hear your own footsteps behind you. You run faster. But in the real world, your body is lying almost completely still. Your legs aren't running. Your arms aren't swinging. You're not charging through a forest. You're lying in bed. So how can your brain create the experience of movement while keeping your physical body from actually moving? The answer is one of the strangest features of sleep. During REM sleep, the stage commonly associated with vivid dreaming, the brain activates mechanisms that strongly inhibit many skeletal muscles. This phenomenon is known as REM atonia. In simple terms, your brain creates a temporary disconnect between the movements you experience and the movements your muscles are allowed to perform. Think of it like a theater production. On stage, an actor is running through a dramatic scene. The audience sees the movement and hears the footsteps. But behind the stage, the actor is actually standing still, while the lighting and sound create the illusion of motion. During a dream, something vaguely similar happens. Your brain can generate the internal experience of running, swimming, climbing, or flying without sending the normal signals required to produce those movements in your limbs. This protective mechanism is extremely useful. Imagine if every dream movement automatically became a real movement. A dream about punching someone might result in an actual punch. A dream about jumping might send you out of bed. A dream about running might have you sprinting across the bedroom. Sleep would become considerably more dangerous. REM helps prevent this from happening. Of course, the system isn't perfect. Some people experience unusual movements during sleep, and certain sleep disorders can involve reduced or disrupted muscle inhibition. But under ordinary circumstances, the brain's protective system works remarkably well. Take a moment to appreciate the contradiction. Your brain can convince you that you're moving while your body remains still. It can create the sensation of acceleration without acceleration. It can create the feeling of jumping without leaving the mattress. It can create the experience of flying while gravity continues doing exactly what it always does. This reveals something fascinating about perception. The experience of movement doesn't always require actual movement. Your brain can simulate it. And that simulation can be convincing enough that, while you're dreaming, you don't question it. But there is another strange possibility. Sometimes the brain's timing becomes slightly out of sync. You can become conscious while the body is still under the influence of REM-related muscle inhibition. You wake up. You know you're awake. But you can't move. For a few moments, you're trapped between two states. Your mind has returned. Your body hasn't. And that is the unsettling phenomenon we'll explore next, sleep paralysis. 15. When the mind wakes before the body. Imagine opening your eyes in the middle of the night. The room looks familiar. You recognize the ceiling, the curtains, perhaps the faint glow coming from somewhere outside. You know you're awake. You can think clearly enough to understand where you are. Then you try to move your hand. Nothing happens. You try again. Still nothing. For a few moments, your body seems to have become completely disconnected from your intentions. This is the unsettling experience known as sleep paralysis. It can happen when the brain transitions between sleep and wakefulness in an unusual way. Features of REM sleep, particularly the temporary muscle inhibition that normally prevents us from acting out dreams, can persist briefly after conscious awareness has returned. The result is an extraordinary mismatch. Your mind says, "I'm awake." Your body says, "Not yet." During REM sleep, the brain is capable of generating vivid internal experiences while many skeletal muscles are strongly inhibited. Normally, these two processes occur together. You dream. Your body remains still. But imagine the timing becoming slightly misaligned. Consciousness returns first. Muscle control follows later. For the person experiencing it, those few moments can feel much longer. And sometimes, the experience becomes even stranger. Some people report seeing a shadowy figure in the room. Others hear voices, footsteps, breathing, or other sounds. Some experience pressure on the chest or a powerful sensation that someone else is nearby. These experiences can feel completely real because the brain is still operating close to the boundary between dreaming and waking. In other words, the dream hasn't necessarily disappeared just because your awareness has returned. Instead, elements of dreamlike perception can overlap with the waking environment. Think of two radio stations briefly playing through the same speaker. One is the waking world. The other is the dreaming brain. For a short time, you may hear both. Historically, experiences like this have inspired stories about supernatural visitors and mysterious nighttime creatures. Different cultures develop different explanations for the same basic human experience. Modern sleep science offers a more grounded interpretation. The brain may temporarily be caught between REM sleep and wakefulness. Take a moment to imagine how strange that boundary really is. You can be awake enough to know you're in your bedroom, yet asleep enough for the brain to generate dreamlike sensations. You can understand that you're safe while your nervous system reacts as though something is terribly wrong. And then, almost as suddenly as it began, the paralysis disappears. You move your fingers, then your arm. You sit up. The room is exactly as it was. Nothing entered. Nothing attacked you. Your brain simply completed the transition back into ordinary waking control. But sleep has another trick waiting at the boundary between consciousness and unconsciousness. Sometimes, just as you're drifting away, your brain can create the sudden sensation that you're falling. And your body may respond with a startling jerk, as if it is trying to catch itself before it reaches the ground. 16. The sudden falling sensation. You're lying comfortably in bed. The room is quiet, your muscles are beginning to relax, your thoughts are becoming softer and less organized. One moment you're thinking about something that happened during the day, and the next, your thoughts seem to drift somewhere else entirely. You're almost asleep. Then suddenly, you fall. Your stomach drops. Your body seems to plunge through empty space. For a split second, it feels completely real. And then your arm or leg suddenly jerks. Your eyes open. You're still in bed. Nothing happened. You didn't fall. You didn't move anywhere. Yet your brain just created the unmistakable sensation that you were dropping through space. This strange experience is often associated with a hypnic jerk, also called a sleep start. It is an involuntary muscle contraction that can occur as you transition from wakefulness into sleep. These jerks are common and are usually harmless. But why does the sensation of falling sometimes accompany them? There isn't one definitive explanation for every case. One possibility is that as your body relaxes, your brain briefly interprets changes in muscle activity or bodily position as movement. Another idea is that the sudden contraction itself may be experienced as a response to a perceived loss of balance. In other words, your brain may momentarily ask a strange question. Did we just fall? And before the conscious mind has time to answer, the body reacts. Think about how remarkable balance normally is. When you're standing, your brain constantly receives information from your muscles, joints, inner ear, eyes, and other sensory systems. It uses these signals to estimate where your body is in space. When you're lying still and drifting into sleep, many of those signals change. Your muscles relax. Your awareness fades. The external environment becomes less important. The brain is entering a completely different state. And sometimes, during that transition, the boundary between physical sensation and imagined movement becomes blurred. Take a moment to picture the experience. You are perfectly safe. You are lying motionless. But for one brief instant, your brain creates a falling world. It is a tiny reminder that your sense of physical stability is something your nervous system continuously constructs. You don't consciously experience every signal involved in balance. You simply feel stable. Until, for a fraction of a second, you don't. Then the jerk happens. Your nervous system reacts. And you're awake again. Interestingly, these sleep starts may be more noticeable when someone is overtired, stressed, or experiencing changes in sleep patterns, although they can also occur during ordinary healthy sleep. So perhaps that sudden nighttime jolt isn't your body malfunctioning. It may simply be your nervous system navigating the delicate boundary between being awake and being asleep. And that boundary is full of strange experiences. Because falling isn't the only sensation your brain can create without anything actually happening. Sometimes, during that same transition into sleep, the brain can produce something much louder. A sudden bang. A crash. A sound so powerful that you might swear something exploded right beside your bed. But when you look around, there's nothing there. No object fell. No door slammed. No explosion occurred. Only your sleeping brain created the sound. And next, we'll explore one of the most dramatically named sleep phenomena of all, the mysterious experience known as exploding head syndrome. 17. The explosion that isn't there. Imagine drifting peacefully towards sleep. Your breathing has slowed. The thoughts from the day are becoming distant. Perhaps you're beginning to lose track of where one thought ends and another begins. The room is silent. Then suddenly, bang! It sounds enormous, like an explosion, or a door slamming with impossible force. Perhaps it resembles a crash, a burst of electricity, or a sudden metallic impact. Your heart jumps. Your eyes open. You look around the room. Nothing. No broken window. No fallen object. No one standing outside. The house is completely quiet. For a moment, you may wonder whether you imagined the whole thing. In a sense, you did. This unusual experience is known as exploding head syndrome, despite its alarming name. It involves a sudden perception of a loud noise during the transition between sleep and wakefulness, even though no corresponding external sound occurred. The name sounds dramatic, but the experience itself is generally brief. And importantly, the sensation is not an actual explosion inside the head. Researchers are still working to understand exactly why it happens. One possibility is that the phenomenon involves unusual activity during the transition between different states of sleep and wakefulness. As the brain changes its patterns of activity, systems involved in sensory processing may behave in unusual ways. Imagine a theater after a performance. The lights are going out. The actors have left the stage. The sound system is shutting down. For a brief moment, something glitches. A speaker produces a sudden burst of noise. Then silence returns. Something vaguely similar may happen during a sleep-wake transition, although the biology is considerably more complicated. The remarkable thing is that the sound can feel external. You don't necessarily experience it as a thought. You experience it as a sound that happened in the room. And this tells us something fascinating about perception. When you hear a real explosion, sound waves travel through the air and reach your ears. Your nervous system converts those vibrations into neural signals, and your brain constructs the experience of hearing. But during exploding head syndrome, the experience of hearing can occur without the corresponding external sound. The perception exists even though the source doesn't. Take a moment to sit with that idea. Your brain doesn't merely receive reality. It constructs your experience of reality from signals. Most of the time, those signals come from the outside world. But occasionally, especially during unusual states, such as sleep transitions, the brain can generate a sensory experience from within. And sound isn't the only thing that can appear from nowhere. The sleeping brain can also create voices. You might hear someone calling your name. You might hear a conversation. You might hear a familiar voice, even though nobody is speaking. These experiences can occur as part of the strange mixture of dreaming and waking consciousness. The brain can reproduce the sensation of hearing without an external speaker. And once again, the mystery isn't simply that the brain can create sounds. It's that those sounds can feel as though someone else is actually making them. So as we move deeper into the sleeping mind, the question becomes increasingly strange. If your brain can create a room, a person, a voice, and an entire conversation without any external source, where exactly does the boundary between imagination and perception begin? And what happens when the voice you hear isn't coming from anyone else at all? What happens when, in the middle of a dream, your own brain becomes the speaker? That's where we are going next. 18. You can hear voices in dreams. Imagine that you're walking through a quiet train station. There are people moving around you, but everything feels strangely distant. You stop beside a bench, and someone sitting nearby turns toward you. They say your name. You recognize the voice immediately. Perhaps it's the voice of someone you love. Maybe it's a friend you haven't spoken to in years. Maybe it's your own voice. You turn toward them, and then you wake up. The room is silent. There is nobody beside you. For a few seconds, you can still hear the voice in your memory. But where did it come from? Dreams can contain remarkably vivid auditory experiences. We can hear conversations, music, footsteps, laughter, alarms, whispers, or individual voices. Sometimes the sounds are so convincing that they seem to come from somewhere outside the sleeping mind. But no speaker was there. No person was talking. The brain created the experience itself. This is possible because hearing isn't simply the process of sound entering your ears. Sound waves reach the ears, but your brain is responsible for turning those signals into the experience of hearing. And during dreams, the brain can generate internally produced experiences that resemble perception. Think of a musician who can imagine a familiar melody so clearly that they can almost hear it without playing a single note. Dreaming can take this ability much further. Instead of merely remembering a voice, the brain can create an entire situation around it. The voice has a location. It has a tone. It may have emotion. It may respond to what you say. Sometimes it can even surprise you. The sleeping brain can combine memories of speech with imagination, emotion, and expectations to produce a convincing auditory scene. Perhaps this is why a dream conversation can feel completely natural while it's happening. You don't think, my brain is synthesizing an auditory representation of a human voice. You simply listen. Take a moment to consider the strange implication. When someone speaks to you while you're awake, you usually assume the sound originated outside you. But in a dream, your brain can generate the experience of someone speaking without any sound traveling through the air. The sensation of hearing doesn't necessarily require a physical speaker. It requires a brain capable of constructing the experience of hearing. And this becomes even stranger when the dream voice belongs to someone you know. Your brain has stored countless details about familiar people, their voice patterns, rhythm, emotional tone, expressions, and ways of speaking. Dreaming can draw from those stored fragments. A person you haven't heard from in years can suddenly speak as though they were standing beside you. The experience may feel emotionally powerful because the voice isn't merely sound. It's connected to memory, connected to identity, connected to a person. And sometimes dreams take this simulation even further. You don't simply hear another person. You become another person. Your perspective can change. Your body can change. Your identity can become uncertain. For a few moments, the brain can construct an experience in which the person having the dream doesn't feel quite like the person who went to sleep. And that leads us to an even deeper mystery. If your brain can create other people so convincingly, what happens when it changes the character at the center of the dream? What happens when you are no longer entirely yourself? Next, we'll explore the strange phenomenon of becoming someone else inside your own dream. 19. You can become someone else. Imagine falling asleep as yourself. You know your name, you know your face, you know where you live, you remember the people you love and the life you've lived. Then somewhere inside a dream, everything changes. You are suddenly a stranger. You have a different face, a different body, perhaps even a different age. Maybe you're walking through a city you've never visited, wearing clothes you've never owned, yet the experience feels completely natural. You don't stop and think, why am I this person? You simply are. This is one of the strangest things the sleeping brain can do, temporarily alter your sense of identity. Dreams don't always preserve the ordinary boundaries of the self. Sometimes you remain clearly yourself. Sometimes you watch yourself from the outside. Sometimes you become another person entirely. You might even experience the dream from the perspective of an animal, an unfamiliar character, or someone who doesn't resemble you at all. How can this happen? Your sense of self isn't stored in one tiny location in the brain. It emerges from many interacting processes involving memory, body awareness, emotion, perception, and the feeling of being the person who is experiencing everything. During waking life, these processes usually agree with one another. Your body feels like your body. Your memories belong to you. Your thoughts seem to come from your own perspective. Your name fits the person you see in the mirror. Dreaming can loosen some of these connections. Think of your identity as a story your brain is constantly telling. Most of the time, the story is remarkably consistent. But while dreaming, the brain can change the setting, characters, and perspective without necessarily stopping to explain the contradictions. You may remember being someone you never were. You may possess a history you never lived. And you may accept it completely. Take a moment to reflect on that. What makes you feel like you? Is it your body, your memories, your name, your personality, your point of view? Dreams suggest that these ingredients can sometimes be rearranged without immediately destroying the experience of being a conscious person. This doesn't mean that you literally become another person while sleeping. Rather, your brain can temporarily construct a first-person experience around a different identity. And this reveals something fascinating about consciousness. The feeling of being yourself may be more flexible than it seems. During the day, countless signals reinforce the same identity again and again. Your surroundings remind you where you are. Your reflection reminds you what you look like. Your memories connect today with yesterday. In dreams, those anchors can become unreliable. The brain is free to improvise. And sometimes the improvisation is so convincing that you don't realize anything has changed. Then suddenly you wake. Your bedroom returns. Your familiar body returns. Your ordinary name returns. The strange character you were inside the dream disappears almost instantly. But the sleeping brain still has more tricks. Because sometimes it doesn't merely change who you are. It changes the rules of the world around you. Gravity can disappear. A wall can become a doorway. A person can transform into someone else. And somehow, your dreaming mind can accept all of it without protest. Next, we'll explore how your brain blends fragments of real memories, forgotten details, and imagination into places that never actually existed. 20. Your brain builds places that never existed. Imagine walking down a street you've never seen before. The buildings are unfamiliar, yet strangely recognizable. You pass a small shop with a blue door. Across the road is an old apartment building. At the end of the street, there's a narrow staircase leading somewhere you can't quite see. You know exactly where you are. Or at least, you feel as though you do. Then you wake up. And you realize something strange. That street doesn't exist. Perhaps the building was based on a place from your childhood. Maybe the staircase resembles one from a hotel you visited years ago. The shop might contain details borrowed from somewhere you saw yesterday. But the complete location, the entire landscape, was never real. Dreams are remarkably good at constructing environments from fragments of stored information. The brain doesn't necessarily need to invent every detail from scratch. Instead, it can combine pieces of memory, perception, imagination, and expectation into a new internal environment. Think of an architect who has thousands of photographs but no complete blueprint. They take a window from one building, a staircase from another, a street from somewhere else, and perhaps a landscape from a third place. Then they assemble everything into a city that has never existed. Something similar may happen during dreaming. Your brain has accumulated an enormous library of visual information throughout your life. Houses, roads, forests, classrooms, bedrooms, faces, landscapes, signs, colors, and countless tiny details are stored in different forms. During a dream, fragments of these experiences can be recombined. That's why a dream location can feel familiar without being identifiable. You might think, I've definitely been here before. But if you tried to find the place after waking, there would be no single real-world location to match it. Take a moment to consider how much information your brain quietly carries. You probably couldn't draw every house you've ever passed. You couldn't describe every hallway you've walked through. You couldn't remember every staircase, window, doorway, or street corner. Yet fragments of these experiences remain available to the sleeping mind. Dreaming can bring some of them together in unexpected ways. And sometimes the result is astonishingly detailed. You can dream of rooms with furniture, landscapes with distant mountains, cities filled with strangers, or buildings containing corridors that seem to continue forever. The dream doesn't necessarily need a complete blueprint. Your brain can generate enough detail to make the environment feel coherent. This tells us something important about perception itself. When you're awake, you might assume that the world feels complete because you're constantly seeing every detail. But your brain actually fills in gaps all the time. Dreaming may simply reveal this creative ability more dramatically. The sleeping brain can produce an environment that feels solid even though it exists only as patterns of neural activity. And there is something even stranger. Sometimes the brain doesn't just invent a place. It invents a place you've supposedly visited before. You can dream that you remember a house, a school, or a city that never existed. The dream can give you an entire history for a location that was created moments ago. And that brings us to the next mystery. Because dreams don't only borrow pieces of reality. Sometimes they seem to borrow pieces of your past that you thought were completely forgotten. Next, we'll explore why a person, place, or moment you haven't consciously remembered for years can suddenly return while you sleep. 21. The memories you thought were gone. Imagine waking from a dream with one strange feeling. You have just seen someone you haven't thought about in years. Perhaps it was an old school friend, someone you haven't spoken to since childhood. Maybe it was a teacher whose name you haven't consciously remembered for decades. And yet, there they were. Not as a vague impression, but as a complete presence. You could see their face, hear their voice. Maybe you even remembered a particular room where the two of you once stood. For a moment, it feels as though your sleeping brain reached into a forgotten part of your life and switched on a light. But was that memory really gone? Probably not in the simple sense we often imagine. The brain doesn't necessarily store memories like books on a shelf, waiting untouched until you decide to retrieve them. Memories are distributed patterns involving many interconnected systems. Some become easier to access, while others become increasingly difficult to bring into conscious awareness. Something can therefore feel forgotten without being completely erased. Sleep provides a fascinating environment in which fragments of these older memories can sometimes reappear. During dreaming, the brain is combining memories, emotions, recent experiences, and internally generated imagery. There doesn't need to be a deliberate search for an old memory. A tiny association may be enough. A particular face in a dream might resemble someone from childhood. That face might trigger another memory. That memory might connect to a place. The place might connect to an emotion. Suddenly, an entire scene seems to appear. Think of a vast library in darkness. You aren't walking through every aisle consciously. Instead, a single book falls from a shelf, opening to a page you haven't seen in years. You may not even know why that book was there. The sleeping brain can work in similarly mysterious ways. Take a moment to reflect on something you've experienced in a dream. Have you ever woken up remembering a person you hadn't consciously thought about for years? It can feel almost supernatural. But perhaps the stranger truth is that your brain may have been carrying traces of that person all along. This also reminds us that forgetting and losing information aren't necessarily identical. You can lose conscious access to something while some of its underlying traces remain. And dreams can sometimes provide unusual routes back into those hidden networks. Of course, we shouldn't assume that every dream containing an old person represents a perfectly preserved memory. Dreams can distort, combine, and invent details. A familiar face may be mixed with features from several different people. The dream isn't necessarily showing you the past. It may be reconstructing fragments of it. And reconstruction can produce something entirely new. That is what makes the sleeping brain so fascinating. It can take something you haven't consciously visited for years and place it beside something you experienced yesterday, creating a scene that never happened. But there is another mysterious process happening while memories are being reorganized. Sometimes the brain appears to strengthen a connection between things that seemed unrelated when you were awake. A problem that felt impossible can suddenly seem obvious after sleep. A solution appears almost from nowhere. And next, we'll explore how your sleeping brain may quietly work on problems while you aren't even trying to solve them. 22. Your brain solves problems while you sleep. Imagine going to bed with a problem you simply cannot solve. You've been staring at it for hours. A difficult piece of work, a puzzle, a complicated decision, perhaps a melody that refuses to come together, or a question that keeps circling through your mind. Eventually, you give up. You close your eyes and tell yourself you'll think about it tomorrow. Then morning arrives. You're making coffee, walking through the house, or simply staring out of the window when suddenly, there it is. The answer. It feels as though it appeared from nowhere. But perhaps your brain never stopped working on the problem. Sleep has long been associated with improved problem-solving and creative insight. The relationship is complicated, and sleep doesn't magically solve every problem we take to bed. But research suggests that sleep can help reorganize information, strengthen useful associations, and sometimes make unexpected connections easier to recognize after waking. Think of your conscious mind as someone searching through a box of tangled cables. You're pulling at one cable, then another. You keep trying the same approaches. Eventually, you become frustrated and walk away. Meanwhile, somewhere in the background, your brain may continue sorting through the connections. During sleep, memories and recently learned information can be reactivated and reorganized. This process may sometimes reveal relationships that weren't obvious while you were awake. The result can feel like sudden inspiration. The answer wasn't necessarily created from nothing overnight. The pieces may have already been inside your brain. Sleep simply changed how they were connected. Take a moment to think about a problem you've struggled with before. Have you ever gone to bed confused and woken up with a clearer idea? It may not have been because your sleeping brain literally sat at a desk, and solved the equation. The process is more subtle. Your brain can continue processing information without conscious awareness. And that is perhaps one of the most humbling aspects of sleep. We often identify thinking with conscious effort. If we're not actively concentrating, we assume nothing is happening. But the sleeping brain suggests otherwise. A huge amount of mental processing can occur without the feeling of thinking. It's like an orchestra continuing to tune and arrange the music after the conductor has left the stage. And creativity may benefit from this unusual state. Dreams themselves are evidence of the brain's ability to combine distant ideas. A familiar person can appear in an unfamiliar location. A memory can merge with an imagined event. Ordinary objects can take on entirely new meanings. The sleeping brain isn't necessarily bound by the same associations that dominate waking thought. Sometimes that freedom may help generate unexpected connections. But there is an important mystery here. If the brain can reorganize information while you're asleep, it must also decide which information deserves attention. It cannot treat every memory as equally important. Something has to determine what gets strengthened and what fades. And one surprisingly powerful influence may be emotion. A memory connected to strong feelings can receive a very different treatment from an ordinary detail. So as the night continues, your brain isn't simply solving problems. It's quietly deciding what deserves to stay. And next, we'll explore another strange nighttime decision: why some memories become stronger while others gradually disappear into the background. 23. Your brain strengthens some memories and lets others fade. Imagine your brain at the end of a long day. It has collected thousands of tiny pieces of information. A face you passed on the street. A sentence someone said. The route you took home. The taste of dinner. A song playing quietly in the background. The feeling of cold air against your skin. If your brain tried to preserve every detail equally, your memories would become impossibly crowded. So during sleep, something fascinating happens. The brain appears to help determine which newly acquired information should become more stable and which information can gradually fade. This process is closely connected to memory consolidation. Think of your memories as a garden. During the day, countless seeds are scattered into the soil. But not every seed becomes a tree. Some are watered. Some receive sunlight. Others are simply left behind. Over time, the strongest and most useful connections become easier to access, while less important information may become weaker. Sleep appears to play an important role in this process. Researchers have found that memories can be reactivated during sleep, and that patterns of neural activity associated with learning can sometimes be replayed. This can help stabilize certain forms of memory and integrate new information with older knowledge. But here's the strange part. Your brain isn't simply asking, did this happen? It may also be asking, is this worth keeping? Imagine remembering every single detail of yesterday's breakfast. The exact position of the spoon. The angle of the plate. Every sound in the kitchen. The precise movement of your hand as you picked up your cup. Most of these details are unnecessary. But perhaps you need to remember that you learned a new recipe, or that a particular food made you feel unwell, or that you had an important conversation at the table. The brain benefits from extracting meaning rather than preserving everything perfectly. Take a moment to consider how much forgetting actually helps you. We often think of forgetting as a failure, but a brain that never forgot anything might struggle to distinguish what matters from what doesn't. Forgetting can create clarity. It allows patterns to emerge. It prevents every trivial detail from competing for attention. And sleep may be one of the periods when this process is especially active. There is still much scientists don't fully understand about how different memories are selected and transformed. Memory consolidation is not a simple overnight filing system, and different types of memory may depend on different sleep stages and neural mechanisms. But the broader idea remains remarkable. While you're unconscious, your brain may be quietly editing the informational landscape of your life. Some experiences become stronger. Others become weaker. Some details disappear. And sometimes, something seemingly unimportant survives because it connects to something much deeper. A smell may remind you of childhood. A melody may bring back an old emotion. A face may trigger a memory you didn't know you still had. The sleeping brain is not merely storing yesterday. It's shaping the version of yesterday that you will carry into tomorrow. And perhaps this is why sleep can sometimes change how familiar something feels. You can learn a new fact, sleep, and discover that the information suddenly feels easier to understand. But memory isn't the only thing your brain is reorganizing. While you sleep, your brain may also be practicing movements you learned while awake. And the next morning, your body can perform them with surprising ease. So next, we'll explore how your sleeping brain can quietly rehearse skills, even when your body is lying perfectly still. 24. Your brain practices skills while you sleep. Imagine learning something new for the first time. Perhaps you're trying to play a simple melody on a piano. At first, your fingers feel awkward. You have to think about every movement. Which key comes next? How quickly should you move? Where should your hand go? The sequence feels difficult. Eventually, you stop practicing and go to bed. The next morning, you sit down again. And something feels different. The melody isn't perfect, but your fingers seem to remember more than they did yesterday. You didn't practice while you were asleep. Or did you? Not literally in the way we normally imagine practice. But your brain may have continued processing the skill. One of the fascinating discoveries in sleep research is that sleep can contribute to the consolidation of procedural memories, the kinds of memories involved in learning skills and actions. These include things like typing, playing an instrument, certain athletic movements, and other practice sequences. Think of learning a skill as building a pathway through a forest. The first time you walk through, the path is almost invisible. You have to push through branches and figure out where to step. Every repetition makes the route more familiar. Then you sleep. During sleep, the brain can reactivate patterns associated with recent learning. This process may help strengthen and reorganize the neural representations involved in the skill. The path becomes clearer. You may wake up and discover that something which felt difficult yesterday now feels slightly more automatic. This doesn't mean the brain is secretly moving your fingers beneath the blankets. The physical practice happened while you were awake. The nighttime work is more internal. Your brain is refining the information created by that practice. Take a moment to think about something you've learned recently. Maybe you learned how to use a new tool, remember a sequence, pronounce an unfamiliar word, or perform a particular movement. The first attempts often require intense concentration. But with practice and sleep, the task can gradually become something you perform without thinking about every individual step. That transition from conscious effort to automatic performance is one of the quiet achievements of learning. Sleep may help make it possible. And there's another fascinating aspect. Sometimes simply being exposed to information before sleep can influence what happens later. Research has explored how sounds, smells, and other cues presented during sleep can interact with memories, although the effects depend heavily on the circumstances and aren't a simple way to learn anything while sleeping. The popular idea that you can play a language lesson while asleep and wake up fluent is not supported. Sleep isn't a magical classroom, but it can be an important workshop. The teacher leaves. The student sleeps. And somewhere behind the scenes, the brain continues organizing what was learned. This gives sleep a strange dual identity. From the outside, nothing appears to be happening. From the inside, enormous amounts of neural activity continue. You are motionless, but your brain is not idle. It is strengthening pathways, integrating information, and helping transform effortful actions into smoother ones. And the deeper mystery is that the sleeping brain doesn't only preserve skills. It can also influence what you want and feel when you wake. Sometimes, after a night of sleep, a craving can seem stronger. An emotion can feel different. A decision can suddenly appear clearer or more confusing. Which raises another question. If your brain is quietly processing information while you sleep, could it also be influencing the choices you make before you even realize you're making them? Next, we'll explore how sleep changes the way your brain responds to rewards, desires, and impulses. 25. Your sleeping brain changes what you crave. Imagine going to bed after a long day. You aren't particularly hungry. Dinner was only a few hours ago, and you feel comfortably full. Then you wake up the next morning. Suddenly, something sounds incredibly appealing. Maybe it's something sweet. Maybe it's a salty snack. Maybe it's a rich breakfast you normally wouldn't even think about. Nothing about the food has changed. But your brain has. Sleep has a surprisingly close relationship with appetite, motivation, and the way we respond to rewards. This doesn't mean your sleeping brain is secretly choosing your breakfast for you. Rather, sleep influences several biological systems involved in hunger, energy regulation, emotion, and reward processing. When you don't get enough sleep, these systems can become disrupted. Hormones involved in appetite regulation can change, and brain regions involved in reward and decision-making can respond differently to tempting foods. The result can be a subtle shift. Something that seemed ordinary yesterday may suddenly feel irresistible. Think of your brain's reward system as a volume control. When everything is balanced, a tempting stimulus might register as mildly interesting. But after insufficient sleep, the volume can sometimes be turned up. The cookie doesn't necessarily taste different. Your brain's response to the cookie may be different. This is one reason sleep deprivation has been associated with changes in food choices and increased attraction to calorie-dense foods. But the story goes deeper than food. Sleep affects motivation more broadly. Your brain constantly evaluates possible rewards. Should I keep working? Should I stop? Should I exercise? Should I eat? Should I scroll for another 10 minutes? These decisions depend on a complicated interaction between habits, emotions, energy levels, and reward systems. Sleep helps regulate that entire network. Take a moment to consider how different you can feel after a good night's sleep compared with a restless one. After good sleep, a difficult task may seem manageable. After poor sleep, the same task can feel overwhelmingly unpleasant. The world hasn't necessarily changed. Your brain's interpretation of the effort and reward may have changed. This is another reminder that sleep isn't simply about restoring physical energy. It can alter the way you experience motivation itself. And perhaps that's why sleep can sometimes make a decision feel easier. You went to bed uncertain. You wake up and somehow know what you want to do. The answer may not have been created during sleep, but the brain had time to process information without the constant distractions of waking life. At the same time, sleep can also make emotions feel more intense or cravings more difficult to resist when you're exhausted. So the sleeping brain is quietly influencing tomorrow's version of you. The version that will make choices. The version that will decide what matters. The version that will respond to rewards. And yet, while your brain is reorganizing motivation and memory, something else is happening on a much slower biological clock. Your body has its own internal timing system. It knows when night has arrived. It knows when morning is approaching. And remarkably, it can begin preparing you for sleep and wakefulness before you consciously notice the transition. That hidden clock is waiting in the background every night. And next, we'll explore the strange internal timer that helps decide when your brain should become sleepy in the first place. 26. Your brain has an internal clock. Imagine that every night, without looking at a clock, you begin to feel sleepy at roughly the same time. Your eyelids become heavier. Your thoughts slow down. The world seems quieter. And eventually, you fall asleep. Then, hours later, you wake. Perhaps you don't even need an alarm. Somewhere inside you, a hidden clock has been keeping track of time. This is your circadian rhythm, an internal biological cycle that helps coordinate sleep and wakefulness across roughly a 24-hour period. It's not simply a feeling of tiredness. Your circadian system influences a remarkable collection of processes, including body temperature, hormone release, alertness, metabolism, and the timing of sleep. At the center of this system is a small region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. It acts as a kind of master timekeeper, helping synchronize the body's rhythms with the outside world. And one of its most important signals is light. When light reaches your eyes, information travels to the brain and helps tell the internal clock what time of day it is. As evening arrives and darkness increases, the body shifts toward a biological state more compatible with sleep. One important part of this process involves melatonin, a hormone associated with the timing of sleep. As darkness falls, melatonin production typically rises, helping signal that the biological night has begun. Think of it as a quiet announcement. The sun is going down. The world is becoming dark. It's time to prepare. But here's where modern life becomes strange. Your ancient biological clock evolved in a world governed largely by sunrise and sunset. Today, we can sit beneath bright lights long after the sun has disappeared. We can stare at glowing screens at midnight. We can travel across time zones in a matter of hours. We can work through the night and sleep during the day. Your internal clock doesn't always know what to make of this. Take a moment to imagine your brain trying to interpret a modern bedroom. It's dark outside, but the screen in front of you is glowing. Your body is tired, but you're still receiving signals associated with daytime activity. The result can be a conflict between your biological timing and your chosen schedule. And this reveals something fascinating about sleep. You don't simply decide when to sleep. You can influence it, certainly, but your brain is constantly negotiating between accumulated sleep pressure and the body's internal timing system. One system says, you've been awake for a long time. Another says, according to our clock, this is the appropriate time for wakefulness. When the signals align, sleep can feel almost effortless. When they conflict, you may lie awake wondering why you're tired, but somehow unable to drift off. And while your internal clock is getting the timing of sleep, another system is quietly changing the chemistry of the sleeping brain. As the night deepens, certain chemicals rise, others fall, and the balance of brain activity shifts. The brain isn't merely passing through darkness. It's moving through a carefully orchestrated chemical landscape. And next, we'll explore one of the strangest substances involved in that nightly transformation, the chemical signal that helps your brain recognize that night has arrived. 27. The nighttime chemistry in your brain. Imagine that the sun has disappeared beyond the horizon. You turn off the lights. The room becomes quiet and dark. You may not consciously notice anything changing inside your body, but your brain has already begun receiving a powerful message. Night has arrived. And with that message, an invisible chemical conversation begins. One of the best-known participants is melatonin, a hormone produced by the pineal gland. Melatonin doesn't simply knock you unconscious like a switch. Instead, it helps communicate information about biological timing, essentially telling the body that the biological night is underway. Think of it as a nighttime signal rather than a sleeping pill. When darkness reaches the eyes, specialized cells in the retina send information toward the brain's internal clock. The clock then helps coordinate signals that eventually influence melatonin production. As evening progresses, melatonin levels generally rise. Your body begins moving toward its nighttime state. Take a moment to consider how strange this is. You don't have to consciously decide that night has arrived. Your brain can detect changes in the environment and translate them into chemistry. The darkness outside becomes a message inside you. But melatonin is only one piece of the puzzle. Sleep involves a complicated interaction among many neurotransmitters, hormones, and brain systems. Some chemical systems promote wakefulness, while others help stabilize sleep. Their balance changes as you move through different stages of the night. One important player is adenosine. Throughout the day, as your brain remains active, adenosine gradually accumulates. Increasing adenosine contributes to the growing pressure to sleep. This is one reason you can feel increasingly tired after being awake for many hours. Then sleep arrives. During sleep, adenosine levels gradually decline, helping reduce that accumulated pressure. Imagine carrying a backpack throughout the day. Every hour you're awake, another small weight is added. By evening, the backpack feels heavy. Sleep is part of the process of taking that weight off. Caffeine makes this story even more interesting. Caffeine doesn't simply create energy from nowhere. It primarily works by blocking adenosine receptors, making it harder for the brain to perceive the accumulating sleep pressure. The tiredness hasn't necessarily disappeared. Its signal has been temporarily muffled. And eventually, the caffeine wears off. The hidden pressure can become noticeable again. Take a moment to appreciate how much of your nightly experience is being shaped by chemistry you never consciously feel. You may think you're simply getting sleepy. But underneath that sensation, countless molecular signals are changing the state of your nervous system. Your brain is gradually moving from alertness towards sleep. Then, once you're asleep, the chemistry continues changing. Some systems become quieter. Others become more active. Different networks take turns coordinating the sleeping brain. It's almost as though the brain has its own nighttime orchestra, with different sections becoming louder or softer depending on the stage of sleep. And this brings us closer to one of the most mysterious parts of the night. Because the sleeping brain doesn't remain in one state. It cycles again and again. Deep sleep arrives, then lighter sleep, then REM sleep, then back again. And these cycles repeat through the night, creating a hidden architecture beneath what feels like one continuous period of unconsciousness. Next, we'll explore that architecture and why the night is not one long sleep, but a repeating journey through several remarkably different states. 28. Your brain cycles through different worlds. Imagine falling asleep at night. From your perspective, it may feel like one continuous journey. You close your eyes, lose awareness, and eventually wake up in the morning. But underneath that simple experience, your brain has been moving through a carefully organized sequence. Sleep isn't one single state. It's a cycle. Throughout the night, your brain repeatedly moves through different stages, each with its own patterns of activity, body changes, and role in the sleeping process. Think of sleep like an ocean. From the shore, it looks like one vast, dark surface. But underneath, there are different depths. You begin near the surface. Then you drift deeper. You return upward. And eventually, you may enter another strange layer where vivid dreams become more common. This cycle repeats several times during a typical night. Sleep begins with lighter stages when you're still relatively easy to wake. Your muscles relax, your breathing changes, and your brain begins shifting away from ordinary waking activity. Then comes deeper non-REM sleep. This is the stage often associated with slow, synchronized brain waves and the most difficult awakening. Your body is deeply relaxed, and important restorative processes are taking place. Then, surprisingly, the brain begins moving back toward a more active state. REM sleep arrives. The eyes move rapidly beneath closed eyelids. Brain activity becomes more wake-like in several respects. Dreams can become particularly vivid. And most of your skeletal muscles remain strongly inhibited. Then the cycle begins again. Early in the night, deep slow-wave sleep tends to occupy a larger portion of the cycles. Later in the night, REM periods generally become longer. So the night isn't simply a straight descent into deeper and deeper sleep. It's more like a tide. Down, up, down, up. Each cycle slightly different from the one before it. Take a moment to imagine your brain quietly traveling through these states while you remain unaware. You don't consciously experience the transitions. There is no bell announcing, now entering deep sleep. No voice tells you, REM sleep begins in 5 minutes. The transitions simply happen. And each stage seems to contribute something different to the larger function of sleep. Deep sleep is strongly associated with processes involved in physical restoration and memory consolidation. REM sleep appears particularly important for aspects of emotional processing, memory, and brain development, although researchers are still working out exactly how each stage contributes to the whole. The important point is that your sleeping brain is not passive. It is changing. Constantly. One moment, large populations of neurons are becoming synchronized into slow rhythms. Later, brain activity becomes more complex and dreamlike. Then the process reverses. It's almost as if your brain spends the night moving between different operating modes. And perhaps the strangest thing is that you rarely remember the journey. You wake in the morning and think, I slept. But your brain has actually passed through several distinct landscapes. And somewhere within those landscapes, another remarkable event can occur. Your brain can become intensely active while your body remains almost completely still. Your eyes move. Your heart rate changes. Your breathing becomes irregular. And behind your closed eyelids, an entire world may unfold. Next, we'll enter that world more deeply and explore why REM sleep can make the sleeping brain look surprisingly similar to the waking brain. 29. Your brain becomes surprisingly active while you dream. Imagine looking at someone who is deeply asleep. Their eyes are closed. Their body is still. Their breathing rises and falls quietly. From the outside, it seems as though almost nothing is happening. But inside the skull, something remarkable may be taking place. The brain can become highly active during REM sleep, the stage in which vivid dreaming is especially common. In some respects, REM sleep resembles wakefulness more than the stillness of the sleeping body would suggest. Brain activity becomes more dynamic. Certain regions involved in emotion, imagery, memory, and perception can become highly active. Meanwhile, much of the body remains remarkably still. It is a strange contradiction. The brain is busy. The body is quiet. Think of a computer running an elaborate simulation while the machine's external controls are locked. Inside, enormous amounts of processing are taking place. Outside, almost nothing moves. During REM sleep, the brain generates complex experiences that can include people, places, sounds, emotions, movement, and entire narratives. Yet there is no external world providing the information required to construct those scenes. The brain is largely working from within. This is one reason dreams can feel so vivid. The neural systems involved in creating a conscious experience are still capable of producing something that resembles perception, even though your eyes are closed and you're lying in darkness. Take a moment to consider what that means. Close your eyes during the day. You can still imagine a beach. You can picture a childhood room. You can remember someone's face. But imagining something while awake usually feels different from actually seeing it. During a vivid dream, that distinction can become much weaker. The imagined world becomes the experienced world. Your brain doesn't simply describe a forest to you. For a while, it creates the experience of being inside one. And yet, the brain isn't simply replaying a movie. Dreams can be unpredictable. A person can change identity. A location can transform. Time can jump. An impossible event can feel completely normal. This suggests that REM sleep involves more than passive playback of memories. The brain is actively constructing and transforming information. Emotion can become particularly powerful as well. A dream may produce intense fear, excitement, sadness, affection, or wonder even though nothing is physically happening around you. Your heart may respond. Your breathing may change. Your facial muscles may move subtly. The emotional experience can be real even when the story is not. And this brings us back to one of the deepest mysteries of consciousness. What exactly makes an experience feel real? During waking life, we usually assume reality comes from the outside. We see a tree because there is a tree. We hear a voice because someone spoke. We feel movement because our body moved. But dreaming demonstrates that the brain can generate many of the same qualities of experience internally. The dream isn't physically happening in the bedroom, but the experience of the dream is happening inside your brain. Take a slow breath and let that idea settle. Every night, your brain can construct worlds that you never consciously requested. And while you are lost inside those worlds, another hidden process may be occurring. Your brain is also adjusting the connections between its billions of neurons, changing their strength and organization. Sleep isn't simply a period when the brain creates dreams. It may also be a period when the brain quietly maintains and reorganizes itself. And that brings us to our final mystery. What if, while you are sleeping peacefully, your brain is performing a kind of nighttime maintenance, cleaning, reorganizing, and preparing itself for another day? Next, we'll explore the remarkable housekeeping that takes place inside the sleeping brain. 30. Your brain cleans and resets itself. Imagine a city after midnight. The streets are almost empty, traffic has disappeared, the shops are closed, most people are asleep. But beneath the quiet surface, the city is still working. Maintenance crews are repairing roads, waste is being collected, electrical systems are being checked, damaged equipment is being replaced. By morning, the city looks almost exactly the same. But underneath, countless small repairs have taken place. Your brain has its own version of nighttime maintenance. While you sleep, especially during deeper non-REM sleep, the brain undergoes changes in activity and fluid dynamics that are associated with clearing certain metabolic waste products from the brain. One system involved is often described as the glymphatic system. It helps facilitate the movement of fluid through brain tissue and has been studied for its potential role in removing waste generated by normal brain activity. The exact details are still an active area of research, but the broader idea is fascinating. Even while you're asleep, your brain isn't simply switching off. It is maintaining itself. Think about how much work the brain performs during the day. Billions of neurons communicate through electrical and chemical signals. You process sounds. You interpret faces. You remember conversations. You control movement. You make decisions. You experience emotions. All of this activity requires energy. And like any active biological system, the brain produces byproducts that need to be managed. Sleep appears to create conditions that support several forms of maintenance. But this isn't the only kind of nighttime housekeeping. Sleep is also closely connected with memory consolidation, regulation of emotional responses, metabolic processes, immune function, and the maintenance of healthy brain activity. So perhaps the most misleading thing about sleep is the idea that you're doing nothing. From the outside, you're motionless. Inside, your brain is reorganizing its information, changing patterns of activity, regulating internal systems, and preparing for the next period of wakefulness. Take a moment to imagine your brain as that quiet city again. The lights are low. The streets are empty. But behind the scenes, workers are moving through the infrastructure. They don't ask for your attention. You don't notice them. You simply wake up. And hopefully, the system is ready for another day. This makes sleep feel less like an interruption of consciousness and more like another state of biological activity. You spend the day interacting with the world. Then you enter the night. The external world becomes quieter. The internal world becomes stranger. Memories are reorganized. Dreams appear. The sense of time becomes flexible. Your body becomes still. Your brain continues listening. And somewhere beneath your awareness, maintenance continues. Perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. Every night, you surrender consciousness without knowing exactly what your brain will do with the time. You close your eyes as one version of yourself. Hours later, you open them again. The room is familiar. Your body is familiar. Your memories return. And yet something has changed. Your brain has spent the night quietly processing the previous day and preparing you to experience the next one. So when you lie down tonight, remember that sleep isn't simply the absence of wakefulness. It is another world of activity. A hidden landscape where your brain dreams, sorts, predicts, protects, reorganizes, and repairs. And perhaps, as you drift towards sleep, you can let one final thought remain with you. While you are doing nothing, your brain is still doing everything it can to keep you going.